All right, I think we will get started now. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on using SharePoint and OneDrive. That is me. My name is Jeremy Cherney, and I'm the founder and president of Tobin Solutions. I think if that picture were really accurate, you'd see me in my stay-at-home garb, which is maybe a button-down shirt and pajamas on the bottom. The kind of a crazy world out there at the moment, and so hopefully this is going to be a real relevant topic for you, for those that have either been looking at SharePoint, or maybe you've tried SharePoint in the past and didn't have a good experience with it or a good implementation, or maybe now you've got your team working remotely, or you're working remotely, and now you really want to leverage this technology so that you can serve your clients, work with your team, and get work out. So hopefully you'll find this today timely content. And
Okay.
the way we're going to do this is we're going to go through the presentation. As we're going along, if you want to chat, and you want to ask questions, you can feel free to do that.
Welcome.
Add any questions to the chat inside of GoToMeeting. And then at the end, we'll actually unmute people and take other Q&A. Afterwards, you're going to get a survey because your feedback is really valuable to us. So we want to know how this webinar went for you. So when you get the survey, if you complete that, please. Any feedback at all is helpful. And then we'll also send you the slides via email. We're also recording this, so it'll also get up on YouTube after a while. Okay. So depending on where you're at, so we want to kind of cover kind of the highlights to make sure we've got enough information here for everybody to understand what this is. So first of all, Microsoft SharePoint and OneDrive are part of the Microsoft Office 365 suite. So a little bit of an overview on that. Microsoft Office 365 is Microsoft's monthly subscription service. They have different tiers of service that include different offerings. Fundamentally, it's a cloud solution, meaning that Microsoft hosts and manages the applications and your data on their servers. They've got a 99% uptime guarantee. And where Tobin Solutions helps is, we start with security first, make sure everything is secure for you. We also help with support and migration and administration, development and integration of all of these technologies. And for me, Office 365 is kind of a Swiss Army knife of things. So just like with a Swiss Army knife, you can try and turn a screw with the knife part of the Swiss Army knife, but it's a lot easier when you use the screwdriver piece. So as we start to think about different ways these things can be used, it's about using the right tool for the right job. Depending if you're already a Microsoft Office 365 subscriber or not, probably most of you are. There's a number of different tiers that most of our clients fall into, are the three basic tiers of service. There's another tier that we're also looking at for customers, which is the Microsoft 365 Business tier. So what that does is that takes all the other components of Microsoft Office 365 that you're already using in one of the business packages and adds security around it. So as you start to have a distributed workforce, as before all of this happened, but now especially where you've got people working from home, different locations, maybe they're using the computer that is their home computer that their kids use for school and games. Security is even more important these days. So we're always dropping security in here in this conversation to make sure it's on your radar that as the information gets distributed, you want to think more and more about security. So because 365 is mobile and it's in the cloud, you've got a lot of different ways that you can access Microsoft Office 365. So the reason we bring that up is because your experience of it is going to differ a little bit differently, depending on which device you're using. So if you have a Macintosh versus a Windows computer, you can still access Office 365, but some of the functions are going to work a little bit differently. If you're using an Android phone versus Apple phone, versus iOS, that's going to be a little bit of a different experience. So the reason I just point this out and as you go through this is some of the things you might be trying here and some of the things I'm pointing out are going to vary a little bit depending on how you're using it. And hold on one second, just want to make sure I'm muting everybody. And the web browser you're using can also make a little bit of a difference. So whether you're using Internet Explorer or Google Chrome or Firefox or Safari, most of it works everywhere, and Microsoft's commitment is that this works everywhere. But sometimes they might add a new feature to the Android version and it doesn't show up on the iOS version for a few weeks or months, and kind of vice versa. So just kind of keep that in mind as we go through. So let's start with kind of what most of you are familiar with. Most of you, if you've been using this computers for a while at your office, are used to the traditional file server. You're used to a box sitting inside your office somewhere, and you've got your files stored there, and maybe you've got some drive letters assigned. So you've got a shared drive, for some of you it may be your S drive or your X drive or something like that. Maybe you have your own drive on the server. Sometimes people call it your U drive or your W drive or something like that. And that's kind of your private drive where no one really sees your stuff. It's not in the shared area. And most of it's organized into folders, and then you use Windows Explorer to find and select documents. And for most of us, that's what we've been using for probably 20 or more years in some cases. And some of this dates back well before Windows, even to if you were using Novell networks and some of that older stuff. And maybe the drive letter you're using today is the same drive letter that you were using 20 years ago, or that the rest of your team was using when they started setting up computers. So that's familiar, it's comfortable, stood up pretty well for the test of time. But as we know, sometimes it has a few pitfalls, like how do you access this remotely now that you are working from home? Or maybe you have already been working remotely and you've got a mobile workforce. Maybe you're coming in through a VPN, a remote desktop. That still works. Just looking to see if there's a... sorry, I have to keep muting here as new people join. It works great, and that's kind of old school. And it may still be fine for using now, but it may not do what you need to do right now, especially with all the work from home. So there's a new possibility. If you're a Microsoft Office 365 user, you have something called SharePoint and OneDrive. So those are technologies in that Swiss Army knife I talked about. SharePoint and OneDrive are stored in the Microsoft cloud. There are no drive letters to use. So instead of your shared drive on your file server, SharePoint uses something called document libraries. And then those can be shared among your team. And then they also have something called OneDrive, and technically it's called OneDrive for Business, which is where you can store your private documents. You can use folders, but they're not required. We'll talk a little bit about how that looks in a little bit. And you've got new ways to find and use your documents. You can use your web browsers, you can use the OneDrive client, you can go directly from Microsoft Office. So there's some new ways of getting at this information. So if you look, this is a browser of what it looks like. So if you had some of these documents before on your server drive, you can match up some of these on the Microsoft Office SharePoint side. So when we talk about SharePoint, and SharePoint is really a big system. There's a lot of different things that SharePoint does. For today, what we're really talking about is one component of SharePoint called document libraries. And those document libraries, that becomes your shared drive. So a document library inside of SharePoint, it's a secure place where you can put your files. Your team can find them files easily. People can work on them together, and you can access those files that are in that document library from any device at any time. Um, and the other neat thing you can do with document libraries is you can have more than one. So maybe you want to have a document library set up just for your leadership team. Maybe you want to have a separate document library set up just for marketing. Another document library set up just for HR and finances. And why you would want to do that is because it makes it very easy to set security at the document library level. So if you've got a leadership team and you've got 2 or 3 or 10 people on your leadership team, you can create that leadership group and then assign it to that document library that's simply, and it exists only for the leadership team. So that's a great way of, and a reason why you'd want to use document libraries. But fundamentally, they are for sharing information with other people. OneDrive for Business is like a special document library inside of SharePoint. It's mainly used for your private files and generally meant for your own sort of non-shared documents. So if you think about it like on your computer, you might have a My Documents folder or a U drive in the traditional server model. Now you have all of that stored up in OneDrive for Business. Your My Documents, your U drive are inside of SharePoint, OneDrive for Business. It's in the cloud, and now you can access that from any device at any time. And while you can do some sharing out of OneDrive for Business, we encourage you to look at it as that if it's really maybe something that's designed more for one of those document libraries instead of OneDrive for Business, you want to put your documents in the right place. To add a little bit of confusion to this, Microsoft has a third product called OneDrive Personal. And OneDrive Personal you get for free with a new Windows computer. And it has a separate account, and it's typically separate from your Office 365 environment. And so while in some ways it works similarly, it's really outside of the Office 365 environment, outside of your security, outside of that. So you want to just kind of keep that in your mind. You may already be thinking, I already use OneDrive, I already have OneDrive. You want to check in, is this OneDrive Personal or OneDrive for Business, so that you're using it the right way and by design. So, where would you when would you save something to a document library, and when would you save something to OneDrive for Business? So we just put a couple of questions out there. You want to just kind of ask yourself, is this document going to be part of a team project or something company-wide? Maybe it's for a department specifically, like HR or finance. Maybe you want to share it with a wider scope of people, and you want those people to have access to that. That probably means you want to save that document out to a document library. If it's just for you, and maybe you're really not planning on sharing it with anybody or only sparingly, then that OneDrive for Business is a better place for that to be. Keeps it separated. OneDrive for Business by default has permissions that only you can access it. So, we talk about moving things to SharePoint and the cloud, and we've talked about mobility. Mobility is a huge reason for why that might be a value to do it. And for some of you, that might be the biggest value of all, and maybe the only reason you would ever even move to SharePoint. There's some other nice features, though, you get with it, and when you're using a document library. Microsoft has a technology called co-authoring. So right now, if you go in and open up a spreadsheet on your server and someone else goes to open that spreadsheet, they get what kind of message? They get the message that says, are you, it's read only, someone else has it locked. With the co-authoring, you can actually be in the document at the same time. So that's a really cool feature. One of the ways we use it at Tobin, we have our leadership team and we have an agenda Word document that everyone adds to the agenda before the meeting. And we're like everybody else. Sometimes we're kind of getting our stuff into the agenda just a few minutes before the meeting actually starts. This actually allows multiple people to be in at the same time, entering information into the document. And you can do that whether you're doing it from a desktop or a laptop or any of that. So it's really a great feature. You also get something called versioning. So versioning, right now we sort of do a manual version on things, right? You save a document and you save it as, you know, business plan 1, business plan 2, business plan 3, and you kind of rename it yourself to kind of come up with your own versioning. With document libraries, when you're using the modern document library, by default, it has versioning turned on. So every time you save a document, you can go back and look and see prior versions of that document. And it's all built in. So when you click on the document, there's a button that says versions. You hit that, and then you can then see all those different versions that exist. So that's really handy, right? If you want to go back and look at a document from a few days ago or from a few weeks ago or whatever it is, you can go and find that document, and you can even do a side-by-side comparison with that document and the current document to see what's changed or what's different. You also get customizable filters and views of these documents. Every document that gets stored in a document library is part of a broader data construct called a list. And those lists of documents, you can sort by name, you can sort by who modified date, but you can create other views of those. So let's say you have documents and some of the documents have the word contract in them. You can create a filter that says, show me all my documents that have the word contract in, and save that, and then be able to go in anytime you want and find a list of all your contracts. There's other ways to do that I'll show you, but that's kind of one simple example. Another thing you get with document libraries is the ability to get notified when someone adds or changes a document. That can be really handy. Right now, how do you do it? Maybe someone emails you when they're done with a document. With the notifications, you can say anytime someone updates a document, it automatically sends you an email. Or you can do what's called a digest list. You can say at the end of the week, send me a list of all the documents that got updated and changed. So that's really handy. You also have workflow options in document libraries. Maybe in your office you have a process right now where you complete a document and then you email it to somebody for their final approval. And then they say, yep, it looks good, or no, they say, here's some changes, go back and do that, and you kind of do that back and forth. SharePoint can actually automate that with workflows. So as soon as a document's complete, you can say this one's ready for review. It then automatically goes to the person who's responsible to approve that document. They can go in, they can make comments back and forth. You can see all of those comments. You can have a conversation back and forth about the document. And then when it's finally ready, the approver can say this one's approved, and suddenly that document is now available for everyone to see. So some new possibilities exist within document libraries. If any of you are familiar with a program like Dropbox or Box, where you can synchronize files from the cloud down to your workstation, there's a OneDrive client for your desktop that you can synchronize files down. So that's really handy. And it's nice because it works at different levels. So you don't have to synchronize everything. You can pick. And for some of you, maybe if you're in charge of HR, you want to synchronize just the HR document library. That's great. You don't need to synchronize what's in the sales folder, for example. They have their own recycle bin, which is nice. So if you accidentally delete something from SharePoint, you can go in and find it in the recycle bin. Beyond searching, there's a lot of other ways you can search, and I'm just kind of putting that out there that there's a lot of ways to search. We're not going to get into that super deeply right now, but the searching on SharePoint in some ways is a lot smarter than the searching on your regular file server. So whereas the file server, you might search for documents by name or by date, while you can do all that in SharePoint, it also does things like looks at relevance, almost like a Google search for your documents. So it looks for things that are relevant. It looks for documents that maybe people you work closely with are ones that they update, and it tries to bring the search together in a way to try and really get you what you need rather than just searching by name. And as I said before, these document libraries are really a specialized list of documents. And in any list in SharePoint, you can add other fields. And we're going to get into that a little bit. You can think, how could I use that? So let's say you had a document and then you looked at the document. So if we go back, actually, I'll wait. I'm going to add that into the future slide. Okay. So you can add fields to documents to add additional information to the document. So rather than just calling a document, contract for client ABC, you can add a custom field, almost like a database, adding those fields to your list of documents, and then you can create keywords like contract, like HR, like a project number. And then it becomes really easy to find those documents to sort and filter based on those fields, and you can actually add multiple fields to it. So you can really do some interesting things that just simply weren't easily available when you were using a traditional file server. So this is what the documents look like when you're accessing them from a web browser. So when you're using a web browser, it does go to a web address. So if you look, this one's going to tobinsolutions.sharepoint.com. So when you have proper security, your ID, password, your multi-factor authentication, you can open up a web browser and go to your SharePoint site. And you might see something like this. This is a document library. Um, and you're looking at it through a web browser. So because it's through your web browser, there's some neat things you can do. So any aspect that you're in SharePoint, whether it's a specific document library, maybe it's a folder, maybe it's a specific document, when you're looking at it through a web browser, what can you do with the web browser? You can actually bookmark those documents. You can bookmark those sites. You can bookmark those document libraries. So if you like doing bookmarks to find things on the web, you can definitely use that inside of SharePoint. So that's really cool. Anytime you're inside of SharePoint, you have this nice search box, and that'll search the current library that you're in and limit your results to that. And as I mentioned before, the searching with SharePoint is way more powerful. It has Google-like features or Bing-like features for your document searching. You can see your different document libraries. So by default, you get a document library called Documents, and with every installation of Office 365, there's a default SharePoint site with a default document library, and it's called Documents. If you had other document libraries, you could list those here, and you could rename those. So you can have one called HR, you can have one called Clients, you can have one called Sales and Marketing, and you can put all of those right here, so it's very easy to find. And then you've got your documents over here. So you can see all the different documents, and by default, you can see the name of the document. You get an icon for what that document looks like, the modified date, and who modified it. From here, you can also upload documents. So if you click this upload button, you can upload individual documents. You can upload folders of documents. You can drag and drop documents. That works pretty well for bringing up a few dozen or a few hundred documents. If you want to migrate your entire server, that may not be the best way to do it. So, we're not covering that inside of this of how to do that, but definitely see us because we can assist in helping you get that done. A couple other things to point out. So you've got this filter. So this is a filter view. So over here, you've got the little funnel or filter. So you can change this. So right now this says all documents. You could create, you can select that, and by default, there's other filtered views where it'll automatically say filter by person or filter by date. But here's where you can create those customized filters as well and save those and share those with your team. And then remember what I said before, where you can take these lists and you can add other fields to them. So this is adding data to your files, this add column. So if I have this document here, so this happens to be a music file, I could add a column, and it doesn't update the music file. The music file doesn't change, but in this list, it adds another field. So in addition to modified and modified by date, I could add a column and I could call that genre. And then I could start categorizing my music by, classic rock, new wave music, metal, whatever your tastes are. You can actually add those fields there. And then once they're there, you can sort on them, you can search them. If you move a document around to a different folder, those values come along with it. And you can have multiple fields. So one of the ways we use it at Tobin is we have all of our payables, and we store all the PDF files of all the invoices and things that we get. So we scan them, we upload them into SharePoint, and then we have a few customized fields for who's the vendor, what was the invoice date, was it paid or not? And we add those custom fields for it, so it's really easy for someone to go in and start to work with those documents almost as a database, but also to help find documents, sort documents, filter on documents. It's a super powerful feature, and it's really easy to use. Now, you can get pretty geeky with it, but at a basic level, to go in and add some custom fields, it's very simple. You can even create a little drop-down list if you, say, have some documents and you've got a certain number of document types. Maybe you've got a contract and a proposal and research. You can actually create that drop-down list of what kind of document that is, and then go into each document and go in and categorize it, so it becomes very easy to find all the contracts, to find all the proposals, to find all the research material. And that's why I said earlier in this webinar, I said, you don't have to use folders. So you could use folders, and there's nothing wrong with using folders. However, if you think about it and you start, sometimes what you're trying to do with those folders is you're really trying to convert your files into a database. You might have a folder called contracts, and then you put all your contracts in there. You might have a folder called research, and then you're putting all your research in there. So you can continue to do that. There's nothing wrong with that. But think about the power if instead of putting them in folders, you created a column with what would have been those folder names, like a project number or a document type of some sort, and now being able to find those and sort those and search those based on that, way more powerful. You don't have to do it on day one. You can move documents up here and add some of these later on. But kind of think about this as kind of what's next for as you start working with it. And all of this is done from any standard web browser. So, when you use Microsoft Office right now, and you go into Microsoft Office and you say open a document, you browse your shared drives on your server, you browse, maybe your S drive or your X drive or anything like that. Up until recently, Microsoft Office didn't know how to natively talk to SharePoint. But beginning with Office 2016 and now 2019, Microsoft Office can read and write directly to SharePoint and read and write directly to OneDrive. It's aware of it. It actually has it in the file dialogues, which I'll show you. So that makes it even easier to use. So here's an example. So this is a newer version of Microsoft Office, and I'm in the file dialog box, where you've got new and open and save or save a copy. And if you look inside this red box that I drew, you can see all the different sources that are now available. Whoops, clicked. So here's the OneDrive. This is my OneDrive, and it's my personal OneDrive folder. I'm sorry, not my personal, my private OneDrive folder inside of my SharePoint and Office 365 subscription. So that's why it says OneDrive on Tobin Solutions, and it's got my email address in there. That's my OneDrive folder. That's selected And over on the right, you can see traditional types things. You can see the documents you used. You can create a new folder if you want. You can see other folders and drill into those. And of course, you have where you can name it and what type of document it is and do a save. And you can see here, it says it's OneDrive. Keep clicking. Tobin Solutions and the Presentations folder. That's what I'm in right now, is the Presentations folder. And so you can see those. Now, if I had different SharePoint sites or different document libraries inside of SharePoint, I could click this Sites option instead. And that would then show me my different SharePoint sites, my different document libraries, where I can save and read documents from. If it's one you use a lot, you can do what's called pinning. So you can take that document library. If it's one you go into all the time, and there'll be a little pin icon next to it, you pin that and it'll show up in this list. If you have a personal OneDrive account, you'll see it here. And then if you want to just browse your PC or your traditional, excuse me, shared drive on your server, you can do all of that. So it's now aware, which makes it much easier to send and receive documents or create and save documents and read documents out of SharePoint and OneDrive. So if you haven't got the latest version of Office 365, you're not going to see some of these things. If you so it's one invitation is to get that and be able to use some of these features. And if you have an older version of Microsoft Office, then you need to either use the web browser to send and to copy files up and down, or use the OneDrive client, and that OneDrive client will copy the files down like Dropbox does. You can work with documents, and when you save them, it'll send them back up. Someone's asking a question about the difference between SharePoint and OneDrive. From a document perspective, the SharePoint, actually I'll just go back to that slide. So fundamentally, there's similar technologies. There's way more to SharePoint than just document libraries, but right now we're kind of focusing on just document libraries. But the difference is that document library is really for when it's going to be shared with multiple people in your company. You can store documents there. With OneDrive, it's really meant more as your business, personal and private documents that you're using for your company. Good question. Thank you. Let's see how we do it on time here. Oh, we're pretty good. Okay. So yeah, so it makes it really nice. That's really a great way. SharePoint is used all over inside of Microsoft Office 365. So I don't know how many of you are using Microsoft Teams yet. If you haven't started working with Microsoft Teams, that's a great technology to be using in general for chatting and voice and video conferencing with your team and sharing and collaborating on documents. We have a separate webinar on Teams. And one of the things you can do with Teams is you can store documents in there for people to use. Teams does not have its own storage for documents. What Teams actually does is in the background, those documents are stored in SharePoint and OneDrive. So if you're using Teams and you're using the Files tab inside of Teams, you're actually using SharePoint in the background. So we recommend to go and take a look at SharePoint and OneDrive and Teams together, because they're really a really incredible combination. And all the things you can do inside of SharePoint, you can do with inside of Teams. You can browse documents, you can share documents, you can chat about documents, all of that stuff exists. So we really recommend you looking at it. Someone's mentioning it's easy to transfer from OneDrive. Is it easy to transfer from OneDrive to SharePoint? Because they accidentally put their stuff in OneDrive when it should have been put in SharePoint. Yeah, that's a great question. So there are some ways to copy from inside of SharePoint to a SharePoint document library. We'd like to take a step back a little bit just to make sure that we understand what the document library is going to exist for and what you're going to be doing. and then help you copy it over. Also, if you're using the OneDrive client and you've got it synced, you can also copy files that way. There's not a single answer for this, and it kind of depends on how many documents you've got and what your intention is with it. But some of these are pretty quick help desk calls if anybody has a challenge on it, wants us just to kind of walk them through it or help them do it remotely. So yeah, Teams and Microsoft Office, SharePoint and OneDrive, unbeatable combination. So you might ask yourself how you get started. Someone's asking, is it possible to transfer through the web client? And yes, there's an uploads button when you're inside the document library to copy documents up. It's good for a few dozen or a few hundred documents. But if you're going to be doing more, and maybe this kind of answers it in this next question about a proof of concept, the world is littered with failed SharePoint migration projects. People often try and go to SharePoint. They say, hey, we've got this drive out here, and they'll talk to their IT provider. Oh, let's just copy it all up to SharePoint. Takes, a couple hours, and they kind of wipe their hands and they're done with it. And we often get lots of complaints that we hear from people that have these failed projects. They say things like, well, we tried SharePoint and it didn't work for us. And when we go back and ask them like how it got implemented, what we often find is someone just dumped all the files thinking it was basically a big file server in the sky and didn't look differently and think differently about how SharePoint needs to work and operate for you. So what we recommend is to start with a proof of concept project. They're pretty easy, but it takes something. We want to make sure that when it's done right. So there's a few steps we put together. We can help you lead a proof of concept project for you. We recommend, in a train the trainer approach, if you're new to SharePoint or you've had implementations before that failed, bring us on as the experts or bring someone as an expert into doing this proof of concept. Once that's set up, then we can kind of train you along the way, and then you can complete the project to move the rest of your documents or just rely on us for something like that. So proof of concept looks like the ability to first get your proof of concept team together. You want to figure who are the 1, 2, or 3 people that are going to be committed to making this work. And you want to, if you can, pick people that are a little more kind of your power user, people that are a little more open to change and trying things out. Maybe someone who's not completely swamped at this moment. But get those people together and figure out who they're going to be. And then sit down with us and look at what's possible with SharePoint. Like I said, a lot of people, they just want to copy everything up and kind of say it's done. It's an opportunity to look at things newly. If you've got your server and you've been using that same server for 20 years, you're inheriting a lot of past of how things were set up and designed. This is an opportunity to look at it differently and say, hey, if we were doing this new today, would we do it the same way? Maybe there's a different way of doing it that would actually provide more value for our company and for you being able to leverage some of the features of SharePoint. Then pick something. Pick one system. Maybe you pick HR documents, because sometimes those don't change a lot. Maybe the ones that people use for policies and vacation requests and, here's your documents for your change of insurance. That's kind of a nice one to use. Maybe you've got another one that works for you, but you want to think like, what would be a good one that the team, this whole proof of concept team, can get behind, and that we can start using this and start figuring out how it works so that it actually is an effective implementation. The next thing is you want some kind of organizational change management. One of the things most people in life often don't like is change. Change is hard, change is messy, change is a problem. I haven't got time for change. We tried that before, that didn't work. We've always done it this way. All of those kind of conversations around change. You want to include inside your proof of concept how you're going to roll out this change to your organization. And we can help with messaging around that. We want them to understand what you're doing, how this is going to impact them, what they can look forward to, when this is going to happen. And sometimes that change management is one of the most important pieces of a project, because if your team isn't buying in to getting this done, we know what that's like, right? There's a lot of resistance. There's a lot of I told you so. There's a lot of anxiety and upset around it. So the more you can include change management, the better. Another key piece of this is a test plan. After you're getting these things up into Office 365 and into SharePoint or into using Teams and the SharePoint as a background, you want to test this out. What is the proof of concept team actually looking for to know whether this is actually working? Is this actually doing what it is you expect it to do? How are these documents working? Here's how we did this before. Here's how we do this now. You can then start to build your documentation, because maybe you've got some documentation now on how to save stuff to your shared drive on your server. You might need to update that documentation now of how to use SharePoint. Then we start with enabling and verifying the out-of-the-box SharePoint and OneDrive technologies. Make sure those are set up properly for you. Make sure that the security around them is set up the way you need them to be set up. We've had heard of horror stories where people have copied things up and didn't understand how the security worked and suddenly had exposed private information to the rest of their team. We want to get all the supporting technologies working. So if you want to be able to use this with the latest version of Microsoft Office, then we need to roll that out. If you're going to use OneDrive for Business, the client that syncs things, we want to get that working. We want to start building up that basic orientation and training for you guys. We want to get that troubleshooting and follow-up questions going so that it's really good. You know, everything is set up and now you really understand how this works. You understand how it's going to work this system. You understand how you're going to roll it out to your company. And then you can sit back and look at the results and say, okay, here's what we got. Now we're at a decision point. Are we going to roll this out? Are we going to add more? Yep, this looks great. We're going to roll this out and we're going to start looking for our next SharePoint project. But you're not forced into anything at the SharePoint proof of concept. You're just looking. You're just saying, hey, can this do what we need to do? Can this make our business more effective? Can this have our team collaborate in new ways possible? Can we securely and effectively share this information with our team now that they're all working from home? What are some new possibilities that arise out of using SharePoint and Microsoft Teams when we're not over the cube from each other anymore? Now we're miles apart. It's an extraordinary opportunity. And there's a lot of kind of uncertainty and scariness in the world right now. This may now be the best time to really take on something like this. Maybe you've got a little extra time because you're not as busy. Maybe you're just finding the need for this because of you're super busy and you're seeing that your team isn't as effective as it was before. This is all going to end at some point. We're going to get back to work in a way we worked before. And one of the people on Team Tobin is a swim coach, and we've been talking about this idea of when you swim, you know, you're on the starting blocks and you're getting ready that when the race starts, you're going to be off the blocks, ready to go, jumping in, diving in, ready to go to swim that race as fast as you can. That's where we want you to be. Some people are not going to be ready to go off the starting blocks. What's happening right now in the world is going to derail them a little bit. It's going to have them kind of get a little soft. And then when the race begins, they're still going to be warming up and trying to get back into race shape. So now is a great opportunity to do this proof of concept. Maybe it gets you what you need now. Maybe it gets you ready to race when everything starts. Here's some things we talk about in the training syllabus. Just a few different points that we put in. So we also do training for SharePoint. So the training is really critical to this. It's a new technology, and we want people to be using it the best way possible, the most effective way possible. We want people to, you know, we all know with computers, right? There's there's 50 ways to do something, and there's probably 3 best ways, and then there's probably like the preferred way you want for your organization. Just like that Swiss Army knife I showed you earlier, while you can turn a screw with the knife part of it, it's way easier to use the screwdriver piece. So we want you to be trained on the different things that need to be done, and we provide training. You want to make sure you're including training with this, because otherwise people will get frustrated, they'll be upset, you'll have a kind of a drop in productivity while people are learning these things and trying to figure it out. You want someone that knows what they're doing to come in and train. So one of the questions someone just asked is leading the proof of concept something that Tobin does with us? And absolutely 100%. Yeah, that's one of the things that we feel we can really make a difference with you on this, is guiding you through based on the experience we've got, based on our proven methodologies, to get you up and running as quickly as possible to really verify that this is the right technology for you. We guide you through it, we help you ask the right questions, and we get you going on it. And maybe you've got an IT department. We'd love to be your IT department, of course, but maybe you've already got someone. Maybe it's a department. Maybe it's another company you're working with. Maybe it's kind of your IT go-to neighbor or friend or whoever it is that helps you. You want to look, they may be great at doing certain things for you, keeping your computer running well, helping you out with glitches, the computer's frozen and things like that. They may be overworked, as someone's pointing out in the chat group right now, that they got someone that's overworked. This is an area where this is not just something to just kind of gear up on and kind of read a quick white paper and suddenly you're a SharePoint expert. We've got experience in doing these projects. We've got some great success stories from our clients where following our proven methodology has had them adopt SharePoint successfully and get off of their traditional file server. So training is critical. That's another piece of the proof of concept. And then any follow-up work as well. So there's another option that works with SharePoint, and it's some technology we ran across, and it's called Z-Drive. We have some clients that they want to get stuff up to SharePoint. They want to have the mobility. They want to get rid of their old file server. But that learning curve of using SharePoint the way I've been showing you, they just either don't have time for it. They just don't want to learn anything new. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with not wanting to learn anything new. And but you still want the benefits of it. So what Z-Drive does is it takes your SharePoint sites and document libraries and it maps them to drive letters on your laptop and desktop. So if you've got an S drive and you want to move everything to SharePoint because you want to get everything up into the cloud, you like some of those features I talked about, but maybe you don't want to access the documents that way, or maybe you've got some users where they're just so overworked right now that kind of know how to do their job a very particular way and just haven't got the space to learn something new right now. Z-Drive is a way around that. We can get you moved to SharePoint. For those that want to use it the way I've been showing you, they can use it that way. For those that want to keep it as their S drive or their X drive or that, you can use Z-Drive. And while everything to them looks like it did before, it's actually all stored up in SharePoint. It is an add-on license. It's not included by Microsoft Office 365. It is a separate product from a separate company. We had a client that we started working with about a year or two ago. They had an existing SharePoint implementation, and they had more or less kind of done it the way I talked about, where the IT provider kind of dumped the documents in. And they've had some success with it, but it wasn't quite working the way they wanted it to. And as SharePoint evolved, some of the ways they were able to do things before just wasn't working well. We added Z-Drive for them, and they've been super happy with it. They now can access the documents the way they want to access them. They can bounce in and out, and the training for their team is much easier. So Z-Drive is another option. I want to touch just a little bit on some other things you get with SharePoint. Right now, we've been talking about SharePoint strictly as a document repository, place to put your documents. It's actually way more than that. Document libraries are just one component of SharePoint. So SharePoint is really this internal website. It's included with your Office 365 subscription. It's secure. The rest of the world can't see it. Only your internal people can see it. It's an internal website, and you can store information. You can organize not just documents, but you can put in photos. You can put in a calendar. You can put in other lists of information. You can include little snippets of spreadsheets to show, like, create your own dashboard of things. You have like a news site. You can include links from other websites and bring that information right into SharePoint. It's a pretty neat technology. And again, it's another way to enable your team to communicate and collaborate. So you get a default SharePoint team site. Here's kind of a sample of one of the things that it looks like. You know, it's a beautiful looking site. You can add in photos. You can have your news information like this. You can have upcoming calendar appointments that are company-wide that they can see there. You can see different groups and other documents that were recently done. You can have quick links. You can have another list here that just shows the recent documents that were updated, or a link to the document library. And all of this is now portable. You can see all of this from your phone or from your tablet or from your PC or desktop, no matter where it is in the world. As long as you're on the internet, you can now see that SharePoint site. So again, as we're learning to work remotely, as we're learning to work not just being able to walk over to someone's office or shout over the cubicle wall with a question, we're trying to have these tools that can actually enable us and empower us to be just as effective as we were prior to working from home, to be that effective now. And in some cases, it is the technology that makes a difference. You know, we can talk about how to do things, but in some cases, the how we did something 2 weeks ago just doesn't exist anymore. You're not at the office. You're not able to do things that way. So it's an extraordinary opportunity to look at how you're doing things and really jump in and say, okay, what if, dot, 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 and then answer that question for yourself. What if we tried something this way? What if we used a tool this way? What if we looked at how we did that one process? And what if SharePoint or Teams could work together? What if, what if, what if? It's a great question to live into, and you can start to see what might be available for you. Someone's asking a question about, is there a reason to use SharePoint Teams site and Microsoft Teams, and they appear to use the same, some of the same features? That's a great question. There's definitely some overlap in terms of how they operate. When you see them, they look a little bit different. So part of it just depends on what you want that experience to be. You know, inside of Teams, there isn't like a single page web browser view that shows all of this on one page like Teams does. This doesn't show your chats, whereas Teams has your chats and voice and video conference. Where they do overlap is that Teams stores its documents inside of SharePoint. So if you're looking at a SharePoint site like this, you'll be able to see those documents inside of Teams and vice versa. So I wouldn't really look at them as one or the other. I'd look at them as, what are the good things you can do with Teams and use Teams for that? And what are the good things you can do with SharePoint and OneDrive and use it for that, and then work that way. And again, that's where a little bit of the training comes in, because we'll show you I showed you earlier how you can read and write documents directly to SharePoint. Well, sometimes those documents, like I said, you're seeing them in Teams, but they're actually stored in SharePoint. So how do you get that view inside of Microsoft Office 365 and Word and Excel and all of that? So that's where some of the training comes in. Like I said, there's a Swiss Army knife of tools and technologies, and it's worth pausing, taking a little bit of a break, engaging some experts, and saying, look, here's how we've been doing things. What's the best way to roll this out? Maybe it's a little consulting work you want up front just to kind of point you in the right direction. Maybe it's you want the consulting work done, but you also want some help implementing that proof of concept, because we don't want to just look and say, move your documents, you're done. We want to say, what are you trying to accomplish? What's going to make the biggest difference for your teams right now? Not teams in the Microsoft teams, but teams like the team, people on your team that are working to keep your business and organization operational right now. What's going to make the biggest difference for your customers? What's going to have you get off the starting blocks, ready to dive into the water at a full pace versus warming up on the sidelines? So thank you very much. Again, my name is Jeremy Cherney. That's my contact information. Feel free to contact us if you have any questions about this presentation or SharePoint, or you want to do a proof of concept. Happy to help you get started. We're also available to speak on other topics, especially anything around security. We have a great security webinar. There's a lot of scams going on right now when people are working from home, so you want to make sure you're educating your team on security. And I'm going to unmute this, and if you want to continue to chat or ask any questions out loud, we'll do that and take the last few minutes for that. All right. What are the questions? Does anybody have any thoughts about what area they would look at for a proof of concept, like which department? Oh, I'm assuming I've got this working. I'm actually hearing people. You can also use the chat window if you don't want to have your voice on here. All right, well, that's great. I'm sure some of you may have some questions after you've had a chance to sort of mull some of this over. Like I said, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help and show you how this might make a difference for you guys. Like I said, you'll be getting a survey. You fill that survey out, your feedback is valuable, and we will send you this presentation. We're also going to put it up on YouTube. And please, check us out on social media. We put out a lot of great information there around security and technology and other things that we do. So if you can like and share us there, that would be awesome. Seeing a few thank yous show up in the chat, so you're very welcome. I so appreciate all the time you spent today. I know you guys are busy and trying to get other things done and serve your clients and keep your organizations flowing in these crazy times. I hope Tobin Solutions and Microsoft Office 365 can be a part of whatever helps you succeed. And we look forward to talking to you at our next webinar. Everyone be safe, be healthy, be strong. Remember, when we're on the roller coaster, the number one rule on the roller coaster is don't get off while it's moving and learn to enjoy the ride. Y'all take care.